with the headline, Canada Can Lead on the World Stage Again. And it was 20 years after leading the charge in developing the Responsibility to Protect doctrine. We should reassert a fading moral standard alongside other middle powers. Honestly, this just reads as comedy. The Responsibility to Protect, of course, was the doctrine Canada was pushing that was used to justify the NATO attack against Libya, which turned into a complete disaster for Libyans. And before that, Canadian officials cited the Responsibility to Protect to justify invading Haiti and overthrowing the elected government in 2004, which was, of course, very bad for Haitians. Both countries haven't recovered. Um, Amidst the horrors in Gaza, the notion that those countries that are backing the horrors in Gaza need to reassert the responsibility to protect, but of course, don't need to assert the responsibility to protect in Gaza, where, uh, unlike Haiti or Libya, there is a clear-cut case of a genocide slash, the source of responsibility is clear cut. Not just that there are some, human rights violations, but there's a very clear responsible actor for those massive human rights violations. Anyways, it just, Lloyd Axworthy and Alan Rock, it just reminds you of where the sort of liberal end of the establishment outlook is when they have the gall to talk about how we have to rekindle the responsibility to protect, but just ignore the fact that the responsibility to protect has not been applied in Gaza. Um, so obviously, as mentioned, uh, Maria Corina Machado was given the Nobel Peace Prize, and this is a form of support for the attacks, which Trump seems to want to turn into some form of bid to overthrow the government. The Nobel Prize Committee obviously making a mockery of themselves. She is somebody that supported the 2002 coup against Chavez. Her name appeared on the infamous Carmona decree that basically abolished all the democratic institutions in the country. She then was involved right at the center of that recall referendum in 2004. She came to Ottawa in January 2005. Canada provided Sumate, her group, with I think it's $22,000 in either 2004 or 2005. And she's been close to Canadian officials for many years. Obviously, US, CIA have been big supporters. So she is someone who clearly represents the right wing. I do believe she has a certain amount of popularity within Venezuela. Uh, but the notion that she's like a peacemaker and not a um, supporter of imperialism. She's on record supporting Israel. And so now it's interesting to look at Canada's. I think we talked about this last week. I'm not sure, but there's been a couple stories about that this week. There was a CBC story titled, or I think this is a subheadline: Why U.S. strikes on suspected drug boats have Canada, quote, between a rock and a hard place. And it's a CBC story quoting all these like military, the Naval Association, the retired naval officers body. I forget what Naval Association of Canada. I forget what it's called. And all basically saying that Canadian naval vessels that have been in the Caribbean are in a tough spot because they're involved supporting U.S. drug interdiction operations, and the attacks in Venezuela are all under that rubric. So now the Canadians are saying they're not directly involved, which I'm prepared to believe. I do believe NORAD is assisting. NORAD has a drug focused element going back to like the late 80s, early 90s. So NORAD is probably assisting with intelligence radar for the American attacks off the coast of Venezuela. Uh, but basically, so Canada probably has some military assistance to the U.S. attacks. And the bigger picture is also that the Canadian officials are saying nothing. They haven't criticized it. I saw there was a statement from Global Affairs Twitter account, kind of applauding Machado for her receiving the award. Not a huge, not like not from Carney or not from Anita Anand, but nonetheless, you have a situation where there's this pretty aggressive American effort against the Venezuelans, probably with the desire to overthrow the government. Canada, of course, led that charge for a couple years, and has probably a certain amount of military complicity today. And they're not saying anything about, criticizing what the Americans are doing or in any way officially backing away from this very belligerent U.S. move. So to me, it's certainly a certain degree of complicity in the U.S. Trump's attacks. This week, RT reported on. I got sent this a day or two before I saw this RT story that the CBC, I think on Wednesday or Thursday, had some sort of interview with a member of the 3rd Assault Brigade, a Ukrainian. And what that brigade is the former Azov regiment, apparently. Now, in this interview, there's a guy with a bunch of tattoos on his arms that they interview, and he's kind of like a t-shirt on. And there's a blurring out of something on his arm. And then apparently in the so that's blurred out on the main program. But then apparently when it was posted to YouTube, it wasn't blurred out, and the guy's got a Nazi symbol. So there's a bunch of things here. First of all, it's just further confirmation that there is this element of the Ukrainian military that is very much far right. But then the fact that the CBC would blur this out is a real comment on the public broadcasters' desire to sort of serve the geopolitical aims of Ottawa. And apparently, the brigades received some Canadian training, quoting the RT story, quoting from a June Le Monde story. And this Le Monde story said quoting the RT story, that Le Monde in June talked about large numbers of members of this 3rd Assault Brigade having different Nazi kind of symbols or tattoos on them. I got an email from somebody about they said they sent a letter to the Esprit du Corps, the sort of military journal, and they're basically suggesting that Canada's taken in a whole bunch of draft dodgers from Ukraine. And in this email, which was a letter to the editor, they forwarded to me, they're saying that 400,000 Ukrainians arrived since 2022. 40% of those aged between 18 and 24 were male, and 50% of those aged between 25 and 54 were male. So a lot of people of age that would be drafted. Uh, and anyways, it's just I think kind of an interesting piece of information. It goes a little bit against. And that was kind of the point of their letter, is that we're providing all this military equipment and stuff to Ukrainians while simultaneously allowing a certain number of military aged Ukrainians from avoiding joining the military. On the NATO front, Trump apparently suggested kicking out Spain from NATO based upon the whole 5% of GDP target, and Spain saying they're not going to hit that target, don't plan to hit the target, which is interesting. I think that it would be very good if Trump started threatening to kick Canada out of NATO if we had a government that refused to heed Trump's demand to of NATO to for all countries to commit to 5%. Unfortunately, I don't think we have that type of mindset in the Liberal Party, and I'm not even sure if in the NDP. There's a bunch of stories this week in the Globe about the Golden Dome, and clearly Defense Minister McGuinty and the Canadian military is pushing to have Canada join the Golden Dome, the American Trump's project to weaponize space, and it's a threat because it's going to likely to further spur arms race. It's obviously a huge commitment of resources that I don't think we have much better things to do than uh, Star Wars with those resources. But clearly, Trump wants Canada to join, and so we have this push coming. Is all this like these sort of fake threats of if we don't do it, then the U.S. will abrogate NORAD. All the notion that these are, this is all about protecting us from Russian uh, missiles coming over the north uh, is very unlikely kind of scenario. But it would give the U.S. further advancement in terms of military dominance and specifically in terms of weaponizing space. And so it looks like we're going down that path. So while you have Trump continuing, which he did, I think, on Tuesday or Wednesday when Carney was down in Washington, continuing to joke about annexation and 51st state and all this business, you have the military, you have the Department of Defense continuing on with this sort of pro-US deepening integration kind of project. Pretty stunning to see, and honestly, pretty limited pushback considering the circumstances. Today, Mark Carney put out a statement about the 20 occupation forces soldiers that were released after 2 years being held by resistance in Gaza. And the statement was, and so about, I think it's 1,900 Palestinians were released as well. The statement was, the release of hostages is a moment of profound relief. After over 2 years of suffering, today families are finally reunited. For the Jewish people, this is a moment that holds two truths at once: a grief for what cannot be restored, and a fragile light of what might still be repaired. So the whole structure, first of all, it's the formulation is for the Jewish people. That's a very interesting formulation that Carney's chosen. And it's just the suffering of Palestinians is just gone. It's just not part of it. Let alone that many more Palestinians were kidnapped, were released, are being reunited with their families, whatever direction, however you want to formulate it. There's many more Palestinians than Israelis. And then you go obviously the big picture and you see the images of Gaza and it's just, utterly destroyed. And then you look at the numbers of people who are, killed and maimed, and it's certainly a quarter million or more that are killed or seriously injured, and and it's just wiped out. Like it just doesn't. Palestinians just don't matter. It's really fascinating to see that 2 years in to this Holocaust, um, and it's just a total like Jewish supremacy is just oozes from Mark Carney. It just absolutely oozes. And basically no one or very few people really call him. And some people will call him on a bit of it, but they even that they won't call it, certainly won't call it Jewish supremacy, or very few will call it Jewish supremacy. And even though he's clearly is, the prioritization of Jewish life is pretty stark by Carney. Um, Carney, of course, has joined all this ceasefire stuff. Now, I obviously support any end to the killing in Gaza and the just the stopping of the horrors is obviously a good thing. I think we should be very skeptical of the Israelis' willingness to actually hold to this. And there's all kinds of comments from Israeli officials suggesting they plan to break that. Um, but it's also the whole everything around it with how Trump, Tony Blair, Jared Kushner, all this stuff is very odious. There's Palestinians are very much being dictated to, of course. All the business about Hamas, all the Canadian official statements about Hamas has to disarm and Hamas has no rights, so this and that. Um, Now that's hopefully Hamas does not disarm. Hopefully they stay somewhat solid. I know the agreement is not too dissimilar from what they've agreed to, what they were willing to accept a year plus ago. And there's a certain amount of this that's based upon a trust in Donald Trump, which is a bit of a questionable uh, thing to do from the Palestinian perspective. Um, but uh, but yeah, so obviously we hope that this holds. But to see the Canadian position on all this is just stunning. And Carney speaking with Tony Blair, Jared Kushner, he's down in Egypt, and just an acceptance and a promotion of such incredible injustice, and to continue that 2 years on is all kind of remarkable. We've seen a number of things this week on this just the open racism in our society. So a principal at a school that has a routine of playing the national anthem. I think they got like six different languages they play it in: English, French. I think it was an indigenous language. Maybe it was I forget the what another, and then Arabic. And so I guess I don't know exactly how their procedure is, how they do decide, but they play the anthem in some sort of rotation. Well, on October 7th, they played the anthem in Arabic, and there was this huge outroar about how dare you play the Canadian anthem in Arabic on October 7th, and how the Jewish students must have felt, and and all this business. And they it made a big kerfuffle. They were able to get the principal to apologize, to concede. So like playing, the Arabic language makes Jewish students feel unsafe or whatever. Um, there's a piece in the Maple that honestly for me, I wouldn't say there's a whole lot of new stuff there, but they bring it together pretty well. And the headline is How the Israel Lobby Shaped Canada's Definition of Anti-Semitism. And just show the work of the that they one of them is that Noah Liu, who was he's Erwin Kotler's sidekick, and him pushing the manuscript or the I don't know what to call them, the manual, the manual um, for the special envoy against anti-Semitism, and they they um, excuse me one second, sorry. Apologies. Um, so anyways, the Maple story goes through, oh, it discusses Noah Liu and his role in creating the manual on anti-Semitism for the special envoy. And Noah Liu is probably the only Canadian who's ever been formally sanctioned or has ever been formally documented by a Canadian university for basically making up claims of anti-Semitism when he was at McGill, and then they did a whole big formal investigation, and they basically, in very diplomatic words, but they basically said he lied about why he was defeated for the SSMU, the Student Society of McGill University. Anyways, they talk about that in this piece. I've written about it. I wrote about it once or twice. That's what happens if you lie about claims of anti-Semitism in the service of Israel. You get hired by Erwin Kotler to be his right-hand man to write manuals for the special envoy uh, position. Anyway, so that story has some interesting stuff, but it's mostly just bringing together what is pretty widely known, which is that the whole IHRA and the manual that the special envoys created, it's all designed just to serve Israel. It's not That's not a huge revelation. Uh, there's a story I saw about how the Eminem Fund has lost its charitable status, and that's the one I think that took over from they started using it as the placeholder, I guess, for the Neiman Foundation after the Neiman Foundation lost its charitable status. So there is some evidence that the CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, is willing to act on these uh, Israel charities if there's enough pressure and if their acts are egregious enough. Um, so that's a good development. There's also the McGill Association of University Teachers passed a resolution this week for the academic cultural boycott of Israel and Israeli academic institutions. Over 90% of voters supported the motion. So there is clearly below the surface. There was a pretty big demonstration on October 7th. I went to a demo. It was about 3,000. Started at Concordia, went to McGill. There was a student strike. Uh, I'm not sure. I saw conflicting numbers. I saw 80,000, and then I saw another one saying it was 45,000. I'm not really sure, but maybe it was 45,000 in Montreal students on strike, 80,000 across Quebec. Anyways, lots of students on strike. It was a big demonstration. So there is, and I saw some other demonstrations this week in other cities across the country. Now, on maybe a less positive note, um, yesterday, John Clark, who really frames himself as this sort of like wise man of the Canadian left, And I have had I've had respect for John. Um, liked a lot of what I saw over the years. But I have to say, in the last bit, I wrote about something he wrote about 6, 8 months ago. I really went into him on the whole anti-Semitism question. Anyways, he had a big long post on Facebook about anti-Semitism on the left. People can check it out. Got lots of traction, got shared widely, very widely. And like when you read the post, kind of operating at a very theoretical level, you sort of like it seems kind of basically agree with. Basically, sort of. Now, there's some stuff in there. It's all a sort of interpretation, and the devil's in the details, if you like, what he really means. It's a little bit, some of it's a little bit kind of cryptic, exactly what he's saying. And and when you get going on it, it all kind of collapses by his stuff. So, for instance, this guy David Cam Camfield, this leftist prof, labor studies prof at the Winnipeg, one of the Winnipeg universities, responds to this big long statement about left anti-Semitism, and basically says, "Well, this is really important because of Eve Engler and Eve Engler's writing," which gets lots of likes, including John Clark. So John Clark is suggesting that his big statement is in part a reaction, an indirect reaction to support for my NDP leadership campaign. That's sort of essentially what David Camerfield is saying. And so then you say, so okay, so now he's getting into, what he's actually getting at. And I think that's only probably tangential to the main point that John Clark's trying to drive. But there is this segment of the left that believes, I don't know what you would call it exactly, but it's a sort of like, I think it's got at this point be sort of seen as just like some bizarre conspiracy that Jewish pro-Zionist influence is inconsequential. He's basically arguing that. He's arguing, what's so fascinating is see how Clark argues this and others, is they don't actually argue it. They don't actually argue it. They won't talk about like what could suggest the power, the influence of pro-Zionist Jewish lobbying. Like they'll never get into any of the details. So they just only argue this at an abstract level. They'll just, you'll never hear that Stephen Bronfman is the head donor to the Liberal Party and that he brought Justin Trudeau to Israel and said the reason why that Trudeau was pro-Israel, more pro-Israel than Harper. You'll never like talk about that. You'll never talk about the institutional infrastructure of the Zionist lobbying groups, like how many resources they have, how many people they're working at it, how they're tied into networks of well-to-do donors and powerful media. They just all that you don't talk about any details. It's just all at some abstract level with just a dismissal. But it's a dismissal without like actually an interrogation, which is a fascinating, like it's just like you would never argue that way with any other issue, right? Now, this has become such an insane position with some recent developments. I don't know if people saw today what Donald Trump said in the Knesset, where Donald Trump does this whole big thing about Miriam Adelson and her being in the audience, and how Adelson is the one that pushed them to open the embassy in Jerusalem, and Adelson pushed Golan Heights on recognizing Golan Heights, and Adelson has $60 billion, and Trump says, I asked Adelson, Miriam, and her late husband, whatever his name was, if they cared more about Israel or more about the U.S., and they wouldn't answer. And then Trump jokes, suggests they care more about Israel. Like Trump is just laying out openly, like what was already understood, which is his biggest donors over the past 10 years, the Adelsons, which are the biggest Trump donors, they care about Israel. That is their main motivation for donating to Trump. And Trump's just openly laying this out. And or additionally this week, where you see that like the envoys, right? It's Witkoff and Kushner who are the envoys uh, to negotiate all this stuff on behalf of Trump. Well, they're both uh, prominent Jewish Zionists. This is this is the dynamic that's just it's just reality, right? You can close your eyes to it, but it matters. There's an it's in part an ethnic conflict, ethnic religious conflict. Obviously, this matters. Obviously, this is a contributing factor, or the fact that the CBS and TikTok were just taken over by leading donor to the Friends of the IDF, right? To the American donor, second richest, I guess at some point, the richest person in the world. His son has taken over, and they appoint Barry Weiss as who's this like fanatic Zionist, calls herself a fanatic Zionist. They point her, buy up her free press or whatever it's called, the free press maybe. Buy up her like right wing Zionist media outlet, and her whole history is like targeting pro-Palestinian professors at whatever university she went to, the one in New York, Columbia, I believe. And and they're open about this. This is like Israel's center of their politics. And there's like video of Netanyahu talking about this, about taking control over of the different media outlets in the U.S. and the importance of TikTok and all this stuff. It's just like all out in the open. And someone like John Clark who just wants to like this this has no effect. It's just the ruling class. It's Israel is just an extension of U.S. imperialism, and anything that looks at individual characters in explaining why this is such a unique relationship towards Israel. Anybody who looks at that, well, that's a trope, and that's raising a trope, and therefore it's anti-Semitic. And this is what they in 2025 with this information, these clips of information, just easy, you can find it easily online, and they're still arguing this stuff. And not only are they wrong, not only is John Clark wrong in his analysis, the extension of his analysis is to say that those who don't agree with his erroneous account, that they are racists. I mean, that's what he's saying. And then he doesn't necessarily go this far, but others do. They say, well, those who don't agree with this analysis, they're racist and they should be shut down. We should do everything we can to block them from participating in political life, speaking, etc., etc. And this is the other part of all this stuff that I find so fascinating with someone like this David Camerfield, who's smearing me on John Clark's Facebook post, is that this is somebody who is supposed to, I don't really know. I don't know if I don't think I've ever met him. I know a little bit about him. I know I think he was involved in like the New Socialist group back in the early 2000s, and he was kind of prominent out in Winnipeg or wherever, and sort of like I think it was a break off from this is really I think, but I think it was a break off from like International Socialists, and they had a sort of fairly decent seeming kind of like radical left group, anti-capitalist socialist group. Is that so? David Camerfield, when he's smearing me like this, the level of prioritization on this one issue is just remarkable. Because like ostensibly he should agree with like the fact that like my leadership campaign has this like anti-capitalist platform, that like everything else he should basically be in agreement with me. Now, I don't think he is probably on a lot of foreign policy issues, and that's in of itself a very interesting dynamic. I think he's someone who falls into the camp of very much aligning with NATO on Ukraine. I don't know that for sure, but that I know some of the people that are in kind of what I think of as his orbit. That's very much they are these people who are all about there's many imperialisms and we have to oppose all the imperialisms kind of thing. Like while sitting here in Canada, we should spend our time talking about Russia as much time as we talk about Canada. That kind of argument, which I think is just totally nonsense. That doesn't come as someone supporting Putin or supporting Russia's invasion. I've been very clear and critical of that. But that there's there's a dynamic that we need to that's important there. But the basic point here is that they're willing to prioritize this one issue, like their sensitivities around allegations of anti-Semitism, that gets prioritized, that gets made to such an important level that all the other politics are just thrown aside, right? Like it's just like tunnel vision. That is so, this is so damning that like, oh yeah, maybe there's a grassroots movement that, 45 different activists and researchers that came up in a very open democratic way with this comprehensive anti-capitalist platform. And yes, I like a lot of this, and it's, I think, important contribution. But all that's like out the window because this one issue is so important, right? That is, it's unstated, but it's just really is the reality. This is so important, and it's like, and when John Clark, when he talks about this stuff, he'll say like we can't excuse any racism. But he's excusing every day, he's excusing all kinds of racism implicitly, as we all are. Let's be honest about it. When we live in a racist society, we are in an imperialist society, we're implicitly excusing racism all the time. Everyone who's not going out publicly, regularly condemning the core group, Canada's role in Haiti, is obviously excusing racism on a regular, right? I mean, this is a fundamentally anti-black dynamic of Canadian political life that we're basically excusing, we're ignoring, enabling, or really concretely. And this is the one I always find so fascinating when thinking about the dynamic of this left criticism of alleged left anti-Semitism is what's not being stated and what's not happening. In Toronto, there is the biggest private school in the country, Tannenbaum Chat, that has IDF days that send students to Washington, D.C. to celebrate genocide, that sent students to barbecue for Israeli soldiers about 6, 7 months ago on an Israeli military base, right? To barbecue for soldiers on an Israeli military base 14, 16 months into the live stream Holocaust. And it's never been protested. No one has ever protested at Tannenbaum Chat in Toronto. Why? And likewise, another school in Toronto where a quarter of the graduates are joining the Israeli military. No one has ever protested it. Why don't they protest that? How is that possible 2 years into a live stream Holocaust and no one has ever protested that in Toronto? How is that possible? Well, it's possible precisely because of the things that someone like John Clark is doing. They are prioritizing, they're creating a terror, a fear on this question of anti-Semitism. So people are so scared they wouldn't dare go and protest at a school that deserves to be protested because they know exactly what they would be accused of. And most of even the Palestine world would buckle. They would say, "Oh, it's how dare you protest at a Jewish school? It's anti-Semitism, whatever, right?" And 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 to not have those protests is, of course, excusing racism. It is, of course, excusing racism. That these schools that are just anti-Palestinian indoctrination, and not just indoctrination, concrete material, military even, assistance, and it just all passes with nothing, right? So this dynamic is honestly is quite fascinating to see, and it's stunning. I mean, at the center of it is that even people who say they and do oppose the genocide, many people are fundamentally tied into a deeply racist Canadian political outlook. And I guess the final thing, this week again, a whole bunch of smears in the Toronto Star, attacks against me, both for alleged anti-Semitism and for being a Putin, Rwanda genocide denier, a whole series of those. People like Rachel Gilmore, she had a thing or Paris Marks, the guy's name, where on her show, he said, fuck Eve Engler. That's his like synopsis of my NDP leadership campaign. So the level of the level of analysis and thinking is pretty much at that level, even on these people who are supposedly uh, to the on the left. It's pretty fascinating, but it really goes to the whole ideological apparatus, right? These people, when you go and look at someone like Rachel Gilmore, I looked a little bit into her. She's been working for CTV, iPolitics, and Global News for a decade. She she's totally like a Russia disinformation. She's like been at Parliament Hill giving like talks about how the Russians are the one behind the convoy in Ottawa, and the Russians like this all this Russian disinformation, just like the outgrowth of like Hillary Clinton kind of. Trump is was a Russian asset, and this kind of stuff. And at the core, it's the ideological apparatus. You can't really operate, and this is obviously true in the media sphere, but even into the academic sphere to a large extent, our political culture is so pro-imperialist that it's really hard. And I detail this in a propaganda system, and then in my follow-up book that's tied to it, Left Right, is that Left Right marching to the beat of Imperial Canada is that they just the Canadian political or the Canadian ideological apparatus is just totally uh, pro Canadian foreign policy, pro US empire, pro imperialist. And so it's almost impossible to make a living in the ideological sphere and not absorb the basic tenets of that. Now, someone like Rachel Gilmore has now in the past, I don't know exactly since when, but she's now become very aggressive in her opposition to Canada's complicity in genocide in Gaza. And you're seeing that with lots of people, and that's good. It's obviously a very positive development. But they still basically agree with the main tenets of Canadian foreign policy, right? Be it with regards to China, be it with regards to Ukraine. They ignore Haiti. They ignore Venezuela. And if anything, they buy into the over the pro coup kind of outlook on Venezuela. And yeah, and so they really I think fundamentally they feel very threatened. They feel very threatened by my writing and research. They won't deal with it at all. It's fascinating also how much like vitriol, but they won't deal with it. They won't like just okay. What's the fear of have me on for 15 minutes to like have a conversation about these issues? You control it. You can ask me tough questions. They don't want to deal with it, and that I mean I think that says a lot, right? They just ignore it. They just it's smears or ignore, right? And it's a very authoritarian political culture. Um, I think I'll leave it at that. And if people have comments or Hmm.
Eve, you're muted. We can't hear.
Eve, do you mean to have muted yourself?
Oh, I muted myself. Sorry, no, sorry, I didn't mean to mute myself. I don't know when I muted. Okay, I think I see Daniel.
Da- Danielle, can you unmute yourself? Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry I'm late. I was just I hate for you to repeat yourself, but I was curious what your take was on the CBC interviewing that Nazi and then blurring out the tattoo, and then like on their own page, it's like they're telling on themselves. It says offensive symbol in this video or something. It's like, well, oh, I wonder what. No.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, I talked about it at the start. I mean, it's pretty embarrassing comment on the the public broadcasters' willingness to just uh, heed the official line, right? And I didn't know that they blurred. I saw someone send it to me, and then I saw an RT story about it. Um, I didn't know that they stated that about offensive symbol. Obviously, they should explain what it is and right. Um, So if you're going to blur it out for those kind of reasons, then you should be you should be explaining that you're in fact interviewing and boosting a regiment, or I think it's a brigade, that's a neo-Nazi brigade, um, the Third Assault Brigade. Yeah, I mean this is not new. I wrote about the defense uh, of Murray Brewster, right, just right after the Russian invasion, and about like Murray Brewster had reported these things previously, right? Murray Brewster reported when he was working for Canadian Press that there was the C-14, there's far right forces that used the Canadian embassy. He's their chief military reporter at CBC, and he reported that the far right used the Canadian embassy in 2014 during the coup against Yanukovych. That he also reported that Canadians I think he reported the Operation Unifier, someone that was recruiting some or training some far right forces. But after the invasion, he doesn't want to touch any of this stuff, right? Because it's too politically sensitive. It's now a quote unquote Putin talking point. And so even though he knows this stuff, he makes sure to hide it, and that's what CBC is doing in this case, like literally hiding it with their, putting blacking it out on the screen.
Ifo, can you unmute yourself, please? Ifo? Okay, well, Ifo, if you can't unmute yourself yet, we'll go on to John and come back to you. Okay, John, go ahead.
I'm
Sorry, can you hear
reminded
me?
this.
Yeah. Ifo, okay, go ahead, Ifo.
Oh, sorry, I didn't think I'd be called so fast. I was cooking. Um, just a quick, I was wondering if you'd reflect on, I came in late, so I might have missed this, but I can't help but notice that the people that Israel kidnapped are being referred to as prisoners,
Mm.
while the people that were held by the Palestinians are being called hostages. And I wasn't sure if you had already reflected on how that affects people's framing of how they see, because a prisoner is assumed to be a criminal, whereas a hostage is presumed to be usually innocent.
Yeah, I mean, indirectly I did touch on that in the sense that Mark Carney's statement he didn't even refer to the Palestinian prisoners, if you want to use that, to who were released. He just refers to hostages, completely implicit that it's Israelis, and these are
Yeah,
all Israeli soldiers.
true. But
These are
I'm talking about the media, like
no, yeah, no,
CBC, all
yeah,
of them all call it prisoners, right?
I agree. No, I agree. They're all, I mean, there's 10,000 Palestinian hostages, more than 10,000 Palestinian hostages that Israel has, of course, right? It's the language it's totally fascinating. It's just language of enabling colonialism, of enabling live stream Holocaust, right? This is, and it's all throughout the political culture, right? But even like, and the point being that the Israelis are, they were the one I saw someone joke about. It was like a New York Times article that said he was kidnapped from his tank.
Yeah.
He's like, this is they have the right to resist brutal colonial occupation. It's not, even the ICJ has said Israel's occupying Gaza, of course. They have the right to resist, and that means they have the right to quote unquote kidnap those in tanks. They do. Do I want some young Israeli that's in the Israeli military to spend 2 years detained? No, I don't. That's not, but they have that right. And they're far more legitimate prisoners than most of the Palestinians that Israel has in dungeons.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, John, go ahead, please.
Sound check. You can hear me?
Yep. Mhm.
So I'm reminded, Eve, of the state. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. You're at the now they're fighting you stage. So well done on Paris Marx and Rachel Gilmore. Paris Marx is a very good leftist center mainstream journalist on digital issues. But both he and Rachel, I think, and others are caught in this manufacturing consent trap because what you do is challenge the frame. They want to move things over to the left, but they don't want to actually challenge the institutional structures that have grown up around them and where they can be comfortably left and have a comfortable income. They have to hustle for it. Journalism sucks in Canada because of what the internet has done. But the idea that somebody can challenge at a more fundamental level breaks their frame, and I think they find it threatening.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think there's especially a foreign policy side to this. One of the fascinating things, this is just tangentially connected. One of the fascinating things I see on people's comments and like Reddit and stuff like that about the NDP leadership race is that there's always people who say, "Oh, I like Eve's domestic policy, but the foreign policy is horrible." And it's like obviously I know a whole lot more on the foreign policy front, and if anything, that obviously that's my stronger, my that's my stronger sort of suit. But it's like, or and another way of formulating what they're saying is that like where I know a little bit about something, I like what Eve is saying. Where I don't know anything about what Eve's talking about, I don't like Eve, or I don't like what Eve's saying. Basically, if you're totally boxed into the propaganda, you're like, oh, whatever Eve's saying is so horrible. He's saying that it's more complicated than just Russia all bad, Canada all good, and Ukraine whatever, right? Like, and
it,
yeah, so
it's 80 years of a historical compromise. We'll let you play at social democracy on the edges as long as you support our imperialist foreign policy.
yeah.
And that's been very comfortable for 80 years.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Eva, I have a question. Watching Mark Carney, whenever he's in the presence of Trump, is so utterly pathetic. And so, I mean, he's such a slathering him with bullshit compliments about all his accomplishments in foreign policies and ending wars. And he comes across as so subservient and pathetic. I just can't believe that Canadians aren't embarrassed by his conduct. Do you hear much of that? Do people talk about it? I mean, he's even more pathetic than almost anyone I've seen when he's with Trump. He just turns into a total lapdog.
Yeah, no, I I agree, and I would say it's kind of surprisingly how little criticism there is of that because the establishment basically all agrees and that we have to do everything we possibly can to try to maintain trade agreement, trade accords, different, deals like that. That I think is all just, I mean, Trump has shown you can sign whatever you want to sign with him. You can get like some new Kusma that trade accord that's, more or less what you want or okay from, whatever. And you'll just violate it like left and right. So what's the point of signing it? What's the point of signing a new accord, right? Like, so the notion even that willingness to just do anything to try to sign some sort of new trade accord is in and of itself quite pathetic. But yeah, the body language and everything, he clearly is going out of his way to do that as part of a strategy to presumably gain some, better concessions from Trump. Um, and there's absolutely no sort of like moral kind of dimension to any of this stuff. Yeah, pretty embarrassing.
They probably see how Scheinbaum from Mexico has managed to navigate that and keep on Trump's good side while, but she still doesn't come across as a total lapdog, or at least there are no public appearances that suggest that. Anyway, as a Canadian, I'm thoroughly embarrassed. I think that's it for questions, Eve.
I do have one question if there's time,
Okay,
Eve.
go ahead.
I was listening to an interview, um, somebody talking about the Canada Post strike
Mm.
and how there's a bad business decision on Canada Post to not go after Amazon and all of that. There's a whole history there, but the tidbit that came out in this interview was that a lot of the business that the Amazon business is going to these other courier companies, and a big player in that place is something called Intellicom. You may have seen their vans, and they also subcontract gig workers and are very exploitive. The news that I heard, and I wondered if you could verify this, was that the head of Intellicom was Melanie Jolie's brother, and that he profits a lot, and she's Ministry of Trade and Commerce. It's interesting to me if that's true, but nobody reports on that.
I think I saw that somewhere too, but I didn't see any more detail than that. But yeah, I think I saw that somewhere too, but I don't know. I don't know anything more. But
Thank
it
you.
should be looked into for sure.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everybody. I think we're done. Ciao.